University of Tennessee. I also serve as a professor of supply chain management, and I'm really pleased to welcome our subject matter expert today, Mr. Peter Legal, who is Senior Business Consultant at Kerber Supply Chain. He is responsible for consulting activities related to voice, vision, and mobility at Kerber Supply Chain. And in this role, he's responsible for identifying and designing emerging technology solutions and integrations with an emphasis on improving the productivity, accuracy, and safety of the impacted labor force. So Peter, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Tom. Excited to be here.
Great. Well, I'm going to turn things over to you in just a few minutes, but please allow me to go over a few things before I do so. First of all, you might be wondering why we are here, and particularly if this is your first masterclass session with us. Our purpose is to tackle the challenges of today's increasingly complex supply chain, bringing you best practices and innovative thinking from academics like myself, as well as from industry insiders and technology experts like Peter. What are we trying to accomplish through this masterclass? We want to provide guidance and insights in managing your supply chain as a competitive advantage, making your supply chain a strategic asset, providing opportunities to excel, ultimately conquering that supply chain complexity that we're all facing. So with that understanding, I again would like to just remind you that this is a multi-session masterclass program. We did have our opening session on Tuesday, 2 days ago, and that session is available on demand. So if you did miss Tuesday's session with Mr. Craig Moore, you can access that session after the fact. Similarly, today's session will be available after the fact in case you want to review it or share it with others. You see the remaining schedule. We maintain a Tuesday, Thursday cadence with our 5-course session up to June 2. And what we're going to start doing now that we've established kind of an overview of labor challenges, we're going to start diving a bit deeper in different aspects of how to address labor challenges in the supply chain. I also do want to take this opportunity to remind you that there is a second masterclass series that Kerber will make available starting on June 9, focused on cold storage trends. Let's tend to some housekeeping matters though before we dig into the topic itself. Perhaps as you realized, your phone lines are muted, so we're not picking up on the cacophony of noise that might be taking place behind you today, wherever we find you, at work or at home. Again, I do encourage you to participate in the Q&A. So please submit your questions by finding the questions tab in the menu on your GoToWebinar menu. So we'll be sure to reserve those final 5 minutes of today's session for those questions. Also, again, I want to make you aware of a handout that's available. Again, you'll find that in the handout tab of your GoToWebinar menu. Today's handout is titled Doing More with Less, Using Innovative Technology to Overcome Warehouse Labor Shortages. So that's an excellent multi-page report that is available to you free of charge. And we're going to build upon some of those discussion points today. So before I hand things over to Peter, let me provide a little bit of perspective on some things that I think about as we talk about adjusting the labor force and the prospect of regulations that might impact the industry during the crisis or perhaps on the far side of it. There's no doubt about it that warehouses and industrial facilities of all kinds are focal points right now. For one thing, they employ so many people. With more than 1 million people employed in the warehouses in the United States alone, it is a prominent source of employment. It's also being regarded as an area of a great deal of concern with regard to worker safety and customer safety. Also, the work itself is changing in light of what we're seeing with the poll results, that extra sanitation procedures are being invoked, that work hours and shifts are changing, perhaps being staggered, that the design of the work is evolving to accommodate safety, and that suggests that our productivity could be impacted. Our ability to deliver the right product, the right place, the right time could be impacted. Certainly the expectations of those coming to work as well as those that interface with our facilities, both customers, service providers, that too is changing as everyone is seeking safety and security. And with that comes increased scrutiny for the safety among all stakeholders and certainly regulators at all levels of government, as well as non-governmental entities. Watchdogs are concerned about ensuring that those who report to work come home safe and free from contagion. Yet, customers still expect the perfect order. They still expect the right product, the right place, the right time. And there's very little tolerance. We may have seen a little bit of tolerance when we were still approaching the crest of the first wave of infection. However, my sense is that tolerance has ebbed away, and customers expect to be satisfied, much in the sense that they were before the pandemic ever affected any of us. And so a broad question, Peter, that I'm going to direct to you is, how can we accommodate these forces without gross declines in productivity? And I use the word gross in a couple of senses. One, really, really big impacts, and also perhaps they're kind of disgusting, right? So how can we minimize the precaution, noting that we have to take these precautions, how can we minimize the negative impacts of these precautions? So with that, Peter, how do you frame the problem, particularly with the new realities imposed by the virus?
It's a good question, and a good way to frame things for today. You know, for those that don't know, I live in Kirkland, Washington, just across the lake from Seattle, also known as kind of the hot center for the beginnings of the virus and the beginnings of contagion. So firsthand, I've kind of seen how things have evolved and changed as we've come to learn more about the virus, and as we've come to start coming up with some different solutions. And so, as Tom said, you know, my day job here is to be a solutions consultant. And so today I want to pose a couple questions. I want to kind of take a dive into what it takes to start solving these problems, and then actually kind of give a couple example solutions, walking through some different scenarios just to give people some ideas, maybe even some terms to Google after the webinar is over for more information. So with that, I'd like to start off today with a quote from the COVID Action Platform, which was a subcommittee of the World Economic Forum that met just last month, early April, to discuss the impacts of COVID on the global economy. And so I read, given the nature of the crisis, all hands should be on deck. All available tools should be used. The number one thing is to focus on employees and customers. Now, I couldn't agree more. I think the number one priority should be to serve employees and customers. But in this subject, or in this sentence, they're presented here as co-inhabitants of that number one priority slot. But I think in certain contexts, the two parties are actually more at odds with each other than they work together as one cohesive unit. So it's no secret, if we could move to the next slide, that customers demand a level of service. As Tom said on Tuesday's webinar, you know, the diabolical consumer demands a level of service. They still demand that perfect order. Employees require safe and healthy working environments. And while these are the realities that we live in, there's a lot of tension between those two statements. You know, I'm willing to wager that just about anyone on this webinar who's running a business right now is almost instinctively putting dollar amounts next to each one of these bullet points that you see on this slide, because every one of these bullet points has a cost to business associated to it. In other situations, I think small financial impacts can be made up with adjusted pricing models or other examples of agility and creativity. But with the global economic ecosystem where it is today, that kind of agility isn't moving the needle enough. This is not a balanced equation. This context sets the stage for a conversation today. How to adjust your workforce to new regulations, not just for immediate compliance, but for lasting effectiveness and sustained operational throughput. You know, frankly, the world today just isn't the same that we knew 4 or 5 months ago. We have to adjust our problem-solving methodologies along with everything else. So what I'd like to do again is take a solution-oriented approach and take a step back. This is a very big problem we have to solve. So if we could move to the next slide, Matt. We have to take a step back and evaluate problems holistically. You know, when we're working within the business and within the economy, especially in a bull market, it's easy to focus on a singular problem and take a seek and destroy kind of approach, but we don't have that luxury right now. We can't just look at a problem and assume that that problem is the problem. You know, it could be a symptom of a much greater problem. Not all variables in a complex multivariable problem like handling COVID and handling new regulations are equally important. So I firmly believe in taking that big step back and asking who, what, where, when, why, and how as a great first step to identify the beginnings of what I like to call a solution landscape, or, you know, the total kind of area that you have to find a solution that's going to work for you based on business objectives. It's a way of narrowing down to see what the useful possibilities are. So for our problem today, what, where, when, and why haven't really changed pre-COVID to now. You know, I would call them more constants in this equation because they're not variables that we have the ability to change. They've been changed for us, and it's up to us to adapt. So if they have changed, again, they haven't been in a way that we have the ability to control. So in the pursuit of making positive, effective adjustments to your workforce, who and how are the main focuses of our problem-solving endeavors today? Who is the workforce, and how are they going to perform their tasks in a way that's safe and healthy, and most importantly to supply chain, you know, maximizes throughput in a way that we can keep accuracy high and keep orders out the door, or going out the door. So the lowest hanging fruit in this context is to start with the how. How can we execute on the what, when, where, and why that we have no ability to change? Fundamentally, we have to adjust the way that our workforce works. Next slide. So while we don't have enough time to exhaust this kind of thought exercise in its entirety, I would like to offer a few example technical solutions that I think fit different business requirements while still minimizing the impact to operations. So we're going to examine some social distancing solutions that focus on keeping humans safe while they perform their normal day-to-day tasks. We'll look at some solutions that change the way your operators collect and validate data with an emphasis on keeping product handling to a minimum. And lastly, and very likely a subject on everyone's mind, we'll finish up today by speaking about the role of robotics and why they cross the line of how as a solution. So next slide. So first things first, social distancing. Now, while the title of this webinar today is about adjusting to new regulations, you know, Tom and I recognize that regulations are going to vary by county, city, state, country. So today what we're doing is we want to take an approach from a kind of holistic view where social distancing may not be an actual regulation in some areas, but we've definitely seen the effect of it and we know how important it is. So whether or not it's a regulation, it's still something that we want to account for. Same thing with minimizing product handling. Regulations vary depending on location, but we are seeing an increased demand from, again, as Tom says, the diabolical consumer, that they need that order on time, and they're becoming more and more aware of the product touches that any one package goes through. So again, the lowest hanging fruits to start with the how, and the lowest hanging fruit of the how is to start with social distancing. So there's two lenses that we can look at social distancing through. There's pre-contact social distancing and post-contact social distancing accommodations. So first of all, Bluetooth beacons are a great low-cost way to enforce social distancing using technology. Now, rather than utilizing pretty complex and expensive GPS technology, these beacons actually use a low-energy Bluetooth beacon or radio to perform proximity detection that can alert you when a distancing violation occurs. Could even be as simple as a little alarm that goes off when you're within 6 feet of another Bluetooth beacon. Now, the best part about this is that it's a hardware solution purely. No integrations required, and that means instantaneous results for your operations. As an example, Blue Up and Zebra are just a few companies you can reach out to if this is of interest to you or your organization. Now, and you know, for the pre-contact, Bluetooth beacons can keep you safe before anything happens, but should the worst happen, contact tracing applications provide a software approach to allow you to determine which products, zones, employees, or other assets are at risk after an incident has been reported. Now, your options here really depend on your host or your WMS. Kerber just released a free contact tracing add-on for our warehouse management customers, but many other solutions exist from other providers. Notably, it's come out very recently that Google and Apple are both reportedly working on adding contact tracing features to their respective platforms at the operating system level. And this means that if you're an Apple only or an Android only shop, you may soon be just a software upgrade away from this functionality. And I'd recommend if you are an Android only or Apple only operation, you can probably find some more information about that by reaching out to your hardware contacts and partners. So moving on from social distancing, product handling, as I said, has recently become a really hot topic as consumers become more and more aware of the number of touches a package experiences before it makes it to their door. Regulations regarding this are, as we said, varying based on location, but the consumer demand we're experiencing suggests that it's definitely worth spending some time going over today. Moving from RF or paper to voice-directed workflows gives you a pretty immediate benefit in reducing the amount of physical handling any operator has to perform. You can validate locations by speaking unique check digits rather than touching an RF gun to scan the barcode. You know, you can speak a quantity and a lot number rather than keying them in on a Gladiator or an RF gun. You know, it's just an intrinsic benefit to the form factor. The recognition has also come a long way to the point where, you know, as Greg jokingly mentioned in Tuesday's session, you could even create your own language to use with the system. It's crazy how far neural networks have come since the last 10, 20 years. So on top of that, for those experiencing throughput problems, either due to labor shortages or due to increased demand, voice is a proven technology that's actually usually implemented for the productivity benefits. For some, this could turn into a two birds, one stone kind of solution. And the way that we do it, offered through Kerber in North America at least, we've put quite a number of procedures in place to ensure remote integrations are not only possible, but actually very seamless. Vision-directed workflows fall into the same category, given that they approach a very similar problem with a similar, yet kind of strangely alien solution to us. You know, the addition of a heads-up display and a camera, which functions as a third eye of sorts, means that a gesture-based menu system is now possible for us. It also gives us the possibility to integrate voice and barcoding and true vision into workflows in varying degrees. That could be one solution with all parts, what we call multimodal. To the last point on this slide, I don't want the uncertainty to deter here. You know, vision's a very young technology within the context of distribution centers and supply chain that's seen some really good use cases with a strong ROI associated to it. The lack of data really means here that every opportunity needs to be vetted individually. So if this is something you're interested in, you may find that project start dates might trail behind some of your other options, just because there's kind of a more intense discovery process to make sure that a young technology is going to work for your operations. Lastly, getting into the topic of robotics. Now, there's so much to cover here. We've actually dedicated several separate master classes over the coming months to the various robotics subtopics. But in the context of our discussion today, I think it's worth taking kind of a 30,000-foot view at robotic solutions, both as a how and a who. Now, as a how, AMRs, or autonomous mobile robots, can be configured and deployed to assist operators with their usual processes. In this environment, the robot can find locations ahead of time. It can direct operators by utilizing large touchscreens, as you can see on the Locust robots on the right there. And they can also offload the responsibility of sourcing empty carts or staging full ones. This hits a lot of points. That can promote social distancing, it can minimize product handling, and you might even see some throughput gains depending on the workflow and depending on the operation. Again, that's just AMRs as a how, as a workflow solution, if you will. Now, as a who, AMRs function very differently. In this sense, they're not assisting us with our work. They are independent agents that are actually performing the work. Now, I've personally implemented voice alongside this kind of solution before moving into my current role as a senior business consultant. And I think most commonly, you'll see AMRs functioning as a material handler or kind of a glorified pallet mover. They're great at taking tasks that sometimes we as humans can't. And they're aware of their surroundings to the point where they can create and optimize their own exception pathing in an instant if they come across an obstruction. Depending on the vendor, some AMRs also have Bluetooth built in and can therefore seamlessly integrate with beacons. Actually, some of them already use this technology as a way of finding their operators. So if those can cost, the barrier to entry for this kind of technology is actually rapidly disappearing. Most recently, there has been an increase in robots as a service pricing models, and those combined with remote environment mappings and remote implementations means that the world of AMRs is a lot more accessible than it's ever been. So whether you're interested in robots either as a how or a who, there's no doubt that the utilization of this technology solves many of the biggest challenges facing this industry. Thank you.
Excellent, Peter. Thank you very much for those perspectives. As you indicated, moving from the low tech to the high tech, a nice spectrum.